Welcome back, everyone, to another session of 30 Minutes with a Modern Mystic. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Sascha, and here we are again.
Here we are again, and the topic of today's session is going to be, why is my family so difficult? You can't help but laugh.
Is there any such thing as a family that isn't difficult at all? I mean, okay, much of the family might be very easy and very nice, but then there are difficult ones. And on the other hand, the difficult ones then think you're the difficult one.
Maybe we should begin by defining what we mean by difficult. Is it someone you're not getting along with, the person in question, the viewer? Is it someone is difficult somebody who's abusing you? Is somebody what is difficult?
We always like to point the finger. And also when we talk about in my family, there's childhood, which is one thing, and then there's adulthood, which is a completely different story. And sometimes the difficult people don't really get difficult until you're in your adulthood. And sometimes they're abusive and really nasty when you're in your childhood. So difficult, I think, has a lot to depend on the age you are, and not only, and how you develop. Like one person can develop and become a person of enormous tolerance, and so the family isn't difficult for them, and another person can develop the opposite, intolerant, and therefore the family is all difficult. So difficult is a difficult word to define because it's rather difficult.
Could you say that sentence again? It's rather beautiful.
And so difficult is, I think, based in perception and perspective of each person. I'm not sure there is, on its own, such a thing. Have you ever seen a difficult flying by or walking along the pavement? A difficult?
Wouldn't difficult be possibly defined as something that is not in line with how you think or believe it should be?
That could be difficult.
But then it's also the definition of different.
Well, there you go. That's what I'm saying. It's a difficult word to find because it's difficult to define. But obviously there is always, when you consider something like 70% of all murders in each country happen inside the home, you begin to realize that homes are often more warfare than peace. But there'll always be those who are good friends. Sisters will fall out. One lives down one end of the street and one down the other. And they manage to go 20 years and avoid each other and not talk to each other. And yet their families are friends. So it's between the two sisters.
How about this? We agree on difficult family members being family members who manage in some way, shape, or form to push our buttons.
Well, yeah, you could put it that way. Yeah. Then, of course, you shouldn't have buttons to push.
Which moves us to the next question. Why, which is the title of this video, why are my family members so difficult? And I think that's the more important or the more interesting part of our discussion.
Well, that's an interesting one because I was just on the Mighty Network, and Ivona had put a question in that because I had talked about I don't know what I talked about now. I come to think of it. She was replying to something, and she said that a lot of top spiritual teachers say that you can't really become enlightened without suffering. And therefore, you could put it, you can't really have a family without suffering. On the other hand, you can't, if you don't have a family, you suffer, as an orphan. But anyway, so suffering is something, see, I went through a lot of pain and suffering, mental, emotional, and physical before enlightenment. But I look back and see how clearly it didn't need to be that way. It was that way because my path, I had an attachment to suffering, and that's the Christian ethic. your children are born to suffer unto me, etc., etc. You're born in sin and you grow through suffering, etc., etc., etc. So if you've got, for instance, a Catholic family, they are going to suffer because it's intrinsic in the belief maybe of the parents, and it's instilled into children. Whereas you've got a maybe Buddhist family, I don't know, but what they believe in. But an atheist family that doesn't have a religion could be therefore much happier, much freer without such a belief. Because I do not accept that we can only grow through suffering. I don't accept that at all. The fact that we do is down to us. I feel we could grow through love and joy just as much, far better and easier than pain and suffering. So the family, which we have created, which we have drawn to, the family that we've chosen to be born in, because everything, our souls coming together in little clusters to work out karma. And so therefore the family is likely to have abrasive members in it, to rub you the wrong way, because you and they will be working out the karma more than you and the easy ones who play a supportive role.
How common would you say is it that our current family members, whether it's our birth family or the later acquired family, have been in touch with us through incarnations?
I'll tell you how serious I look at that. I doubt that there's a family on the planet that is not that way, particularly now at the times we're in. Yes, it's all outworkings at the moment, trying to resolve karma and move on. There's an enormous amount of it going on. And so just as it's explosive between countries, now it's explosive in many families. You know, along came the COVID and then the vax. Well, there was a lot of resentment in many families before that, and suddenly they had a reason to move into a deep, like a gulf between them. I'm going to be vaxxed, I'm not. And so they use it as an excuse to simply dive back in to old trauma, old drama.
Where does all this go back to? If you through your metaphysical experiences could share some insight with us on.
Remember when you and I came walking out of that cave? You were bent over with long hair, and I'd got this woman and you wanted her, and I poked you in the eye with a stick.
That's how it all started.
That's where it began.
I suspected it would be something like that.
A long time ago. Well, yeah, I have seen, for instance, which I wrote in one of my books, in one of the wars of long ago, Romans against Parthians, I think, and there were two people fighting, and one killed the other, and then they are back, shall we say, in cloud nine, trying to recover from their wounds, the shock of death, because for many, transition is an enormous shock, especially when they find they're still alive. And then they go back in, and then eventually they're back in another battle, and they kill each other. And after about 3 or 4 times, you know, they look at each other and say, how long do we have to do this? I remember killing you, being killed by you, killing you, being killed by you. Let's quit this. It's enough. And so this is going on. I mean, I'm serious, every car crash, 2 people collide in vehicles, it makes no difference. Those 2 people collided. They have collided through so many incarnations, they're still colliding. Sometimes it's fatal, so it will continue. But often it isn't, and then they could work it out. But of course, we live in total ignorance. I was reading recently, and somebody, and I don't know this personally, said that most other galactic beings have a memory of all their lifetimes, and that we don't deliberately. And I could certainly see this point, because the memory of it, the trauma and the guilt and the drama we've been through
Would be shocking.
be shattering, demoralizing. But on the other hand, as I've gone through many of my incarnations and looking at them, yes, I did some pretty rough stuff, and I had some pretty rough stuff done to me. But as I look at it, I found a certain liberation in it, but it became my path in many ways, metaphysically traveling into old lives. Even the book Getting There, Boy with No Shadow, all those past encounters were past lives of mine that Adam went through. They're all mine. I cried a whole box of tissues through that.
So
And
going back to the question that's in the title of this video, the answer would be your family or our family is so difficult because it's the externalization of the difficulties we've created over centuries, millennia, lifetimes.
I would say make peace with the difficult ones. I look back on my youth, and most of the difficult ones died, and we certainly didn't have peace between them. I had a very troubled relationship with pretty well all my family. It was not good, with one exception. And but on the other hand, when you love yourself unconditionally, you clean the slate, as it were. It severs the negative connections with other people, because you can't love yourself unconditionally without loving humanity. And love is the answer. And so I definitely today would advise anybody. I don't mean become a doormat, and I don't mean cruel and abase yourself. I mean, if you can find difficult members not if you have difficult members in the family, they have their point of view and they have their way of seeing things, and it might be right off by normal human standards. But if you can find a way to connect with them, you might find a sort of sympathy for their distorted life view, because there's no doubt many people have a very distorted and disturbed life view, but they've got that through incarnations of distorted and disturbed lives. So you can't actually condemn anybody in the end, even the murderer, because the murderer didn't come from a place of love. He's come from a place of incredible violence through many, maybe quite a lot of incarnations. And although that doesn't excuse them by any means, it does mean that there is a way to treat those people with compassion. And so if you can find that in you, to meet somebody in the family who is difficult, not only will you help resolve it between you, but you will grow in the process. Because as I've mentioned other times, sometimes those difficulties are not really a difference in our intellectual outlook on life. Sometimes we're very different on an emotional level, like an autistic child. They have emotionally, they're very different from an average person. They're very, very different. It doesn't make them wrong. It's just different. And, you know, they're the result of well, I won't go into that, but as the numbers of vaccinations have increased over the years, I'm not talking about the latest one, as the vaccinations have increased, so has autism. It's gone up, it's rocketing up, it's scary, it's getting so prevalent now. And yes, the last one is playing its role in all that as well.
Okay. I have observed that the closest family members, being father, mother, brothers, are often the ones that people have the most problems with, generally speaking. And what I see in there is that with those beings or with those souls that we've had maybe the strongest issues, we get them in a position which is very close, which is supposed to be a love relationship, let's say mother or father. And then there's this opportunity having them so close, but internally on a deep level being in so deep conflict, which makes it very possible to resolve it, but still most people don't. Do you agree with that observation, that that's the case, or do you see that differently with these close family members, which like...
Yeah, but I also think it depends on each person in the family. Like I noticed as I've moved deeper into love, particularly unconditional love, I feel less and less emotional about it. Whereas in the earlier days, my love, well, what I thought was love was very emotional, incredibly emotional. But now it's far less. I love my brother, but I feel very unemotional about him. And, you know, and my love can very easily say to him, you better cultivate your own family friendships, because when you get helpless, don't think you're coming to live with me, because it ain't going to happen. And now that's not based on anything other than it couldn't work anyway. But the simple point is I'm being true to myself. He's older than me, and I'm being true to myself. But that doesn't mean any less love for him, but there's no emotional attachment such as I should do this, and emotional obligations. I've got an obligation. He's my brother and all that stuff, you know, and then you do it unwillingly and grudgingly, and then you're tying another knot. So you come back and that time, next time, you've got to do it honestly.
Why do we
So
love making those knots? I think that's a great image that you just brought up. And I think emotional attachments play a key role in why family members are so difficult. Why do we keep creating that?
I think most of the knots are emotional attachments and emotional obligation. You show me, here, look at you. Do you not feel obligated to your children?
Oh yeah,
Emotionally?
absolutely.
Absolutely. But will there come an age when you can let that go? Now that's an interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I'm often consciously like thinking about it, and it's I think it's the most difficult thing.
Exactly. It's
There
only
is.
when something happened in my family that I realized that I had an emotional obligation to a member who was in his early 50s, and I'm thinking, this is ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. I have no obligation. This person came through me, but he's not mine. You know, where you can't own your children, they come through you, but you don't own them, but you have an obligation for them in their formative years and in their teenage years, yes, and in their early adult years, yes. But there comes a point where they are their own people and need to be, and know that they are and need to be. Like my father died probably at the perfect age. I was about 24, I think, and he died. And I was ready to stand on my feet, but I felt when I'd emigrated, I felt it hit me one day, wow, there's no dad to fall back on. There's no dad to go and say, hey, dad, how do I do this? Or will you help me with that? It was up to me now. And I look back, I needed that. I needed to grow. Whereas if you've got a parent with an emotional obligation, you're going to lean on them and lean on them and lean on them. And then if you're middle age and they finally die and you have leaned on them, you're going to find somebody else to lean on, because otherwise it's going to be very difficult.
I
I
think
look
that's
back,
very...
I had that with my mother, and I went straight to my wife, from my mother to my wife at 21. If you told me that, I'd have said you're mad. But looking back, I can see it clearly.
I think it's a pretty common pattern.
I think it's probably is a common pattern. But let me ask you, in your family, without taking it over seriously, who do you feel you were most connected to and most enjoyed being with, not being with, but most depended on? Whose loss would have been the greatest impact?
I would definitely say my mother.
Yeah, I'm the same.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I often look back at kids who lose their mother. 20 years later, they're still devastated. And I think, yeah, I get it. I understand. Okay, I think that's a long time to hang on, but I do understand the devastation of that moment. It must be pretty powerful.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
wondering,
it's
like going back to that question that I just asked a couple minutes ago, like why do you think, what's your insight on why do we keep creating these emotional knots, these emotional attachments? Why do we keep playing this game?
Because we don't know what love is.
Okay.
Love is a freedom song. So if you love, you love. Love doesn't attach, nor can it be loved to. Sorry, nor can it be attached to. But you know, we have grown up now for hundreds of centuries. Love is the most powerful of all the emotions. And they're still writing it in books to this day. And it's still the common belief. You know, people like you and I, if you believe that, people like you and I are unusual. Love is the power of creation. And people still use it as an emotion. And therefore, they emotionally attach to their whoever they love. And therefore, that's natural and normal.
I would
The
even
fact is, of course, it isn't.
I would even say that to someone who sees love as the highest emotion, something, a decision or a feel or an expression or development that is actually based in unconditional love may seem cruel or may seem hard at sometimes, because
Maybe. I mean, if we look at nature, every mother is utterly devoted to her young. And yet there comes a time they're grown up and she pushes them away,
yep.
pushes them away. That is a greater expression of love than most of us. You know, that's what love does. Okay, you're on your own. Okay, they're not intellectually saying that, but they follow the expression of love. And
So
they can live in the same area, but it's very clear they are now on their own.
So
And
in conclusion, the answer to our question for this video would be our family members are so difficult because we have not managed to embrace unconditional love.
well, you said it. I mean, it always comes down to that. You know, this is why I almost quit counselling, simply because there's only one answer. There's a lack of love, a lack of self-love. Because when you love self, then you love humanity, because you are humanity. The problem is the language is not sufficient to the content of what you're trying to say. Like unconditional love sounds nothing, just another form of love, but unconditional means there are no conditions. And if you love your wife and your wife has an affair with the man next door, and you don't go in there and shoot her because, why did you shoot her? Because I love her. You know, that's all. Oh, yes, the judge says, yes, I understand. Well, I mean, we're crazy. But he says you shouldn't do that, nevertheless. But deep down, he understands. He'd probably do the same if he could get away with it. But love says, okay, if this is, if I can't deal with this, then we need to separate and move away. But we don't go killing them. Love, William Blake, the great poet and mystic and philosopher and sculptor, he played around. He played around, and one day a woman was with his wife when he was certainly in their middle ages, and she said to her, why do you stay with him? Why do you stay with him? You know he's always playing around. He's not faithful to you. And she simply looked at that woman, and this is recorded. She said, because I love him. She didn't use the word unconditional. She said, because I love him. Now, that didn't make her a doormat. It made her, in many ways, a greater person than he was, because he probably didn't have that form of love. He was gifted and artistic and all that, and was looked on with enormous admiration, whereas she was just his wife. But of the two, she was probably the greatest person, because she simply loved him, and that was what she did. And there were no conditions placed on it. Now today we'd say, oh, stupid woman, she needs to get liberated. But no, liberation is just another excuse to carry on in the deeper into the illusion.
How about giving viewers practical ideas of how to overcome grudges you may hold against any family member that may be very difficult to overcome, that you've tried for years and years to overcome? Any ideas?
A short-term solution is take a machine gun in and shoot the whole lot, but that is a very short-term solution. You will seem to be joining them fairly soon. Okay, I'll be serious. I would seriously say this is not about my family members. This is about me. And every one of those who pushes my buttons and I think is difficult, in fact, is touching my button where I have that similar aspect in myself, and I don't like it, and I don't know what to do about it. So Uncle George, every time he gives me that smile, that triggers me. And it's that smile, that triggers me. And inside, what is my problem? What is my problem?
What's wrong with Uncle George's smile?
What is my problem about that smile? And it can be as trivial as that. But once you find why that affects you, putting Uncle George out of the equation, you will find that Uncle George, with his smile, cannot press your button or any buttons. And gradually, if you work your way through the family members who are difficult, loving the supportive ones, working your way, the ones who are most difficult will give you the most growth. But the supportive ones are equally important because we need support to our growth.
I know we've gotten a little bit over half an hour, but there's one more thing which I would like to address because I know it's a very common topic out there. How about abusive family members? Anything from having been violated to just verbal abuse to, you know, very violent kind of abusive people that you have such a hard time because either they've done harm to you physically or they've done harm to you on a psychological level. Do you have any help for people who find themselves in that situation, how to more easily embrace love?
What you're talking about over in Australia is so common. I guess
I think all over the world, yeah.
All over the world, it's so common, especially women being abused. It's a peculiar one. If a person in their incarnations, if they incarnate as a boy, and if they've been abusive in various ways through many incarnations, they will be abused. And if they're a girl, they will get abused. And so they experience the other end of it, which is not nice, and it's not their fault. But because the soul really doesn't mind what it puts the personality through. However, we could talk about forgiveness and all that, but I don't really, I'm not a great believer in forgiveness because forgiveness holds hands with blame and they can keep going round and round. It's maybe one we could talk about sometime. But on the other hand, I do think that once the situation is developed, you should move out of an abusive relationship. You should move out of an abusive household. And if you're a child, you're at that mercy. There's nothing you can do as a child except hope that there is a beautiful member of the family who will rescue you. But we do need to remember that we incarnate into that, not necessarily to experience not necessarily our karma, but there are addictions to suffering, as crazy as it sounds. And I remember my first wife, Trini, my late wife, she used to be on Lifeline, and she was one of the counselors. And she said one of the most difficult things to do was to get a woman to leave an abusive situation. Better the devil you know and the devil you don't. And there are such wonderful support systems put up. And she said it was really difficult to get the woman to make that. In other words, there was safety within the pain and suffering because the bills were paid and the money was there. There was that safety. And the thought, the pain and suffering ending, but then how do I live was worse than the pain of the abuse. Some couldn't wait to get out, but she said it amazed her how many she had to talk them out of it to get out of that situation. And so my advice would be basically That's a mosquito in this room, not good. The cat opened the door last night. He's a little brute. And don't like mozzies. I like to recycle them into heaven so they can hurry up back to their next body. And so the situation is, if you're an adult, then look to use it for your development. And if you're a child, well, you won't be listening to me.
If you're a child with access to YouTube.
It's a tough one for a child. I can't laugh at it. It's a really tough one.
Yep. So I guess
But as an adult, realize that you're in a situation that basically in every moment of your life, you are creating the content and direction of every moment of your life. And as a child, there's not much you can do about that. As an adult, you can address the situation in you, and you will find the outside of it is resolved almost always.
I guess
it works that way.
It always comes down to, if you have not crossed that bridge of taking responsibility, nothing is going to happen. Nothing's going to change. Nothing is going to heal.
Responsibility for self. Yes. Yes. That's one that most people prefer to avoid. It's not my fault. I didn't do it. Somebody else. And it doesn't work. It's not a matter of fault. It's not a matter of right or wrong. It's a matter of it is as it is. You either put up with it or you change it. And you change it by changing you.
That is a beautiful way to end this. Thank you, everybody, for listening. As always, share and like and comment this video. And see you in the next episode.
Next episode's almost on its way. We literally decide what we're going to talk about 2 minutes, the 2 minutes we chat before we start. So it's not like it's all been set up.
And we're open for suggestions. You can comment below and you can put in your suggestions. Some people do that sometimes. You can also send them in to support@microots.org.
We welcome your suggestions. Just don't ask me if God created us, who created God. That one I don't answer.
Okay. Farewell, my friend.
Thank you.